Hello, everyone, and welcome to this IANA webinar, You're Hired, Grow an Intermodal Workforce with Apprenticeships. I'm Hal Pollard, the Director of Education at IANA, and I'm pleased to introduce today's guest, Rachel Rowe, the Director of Apprenticeships at FASTPORT. Now, a little bit about what to expect in this episode. First, we'll talk about FASTPORT and how it works. Then, look at what a registered apprenticeship actually is, why registered apprenticeships make sense. Look at the industry intermediary approach that FASTPORT uses, talk about the benefits of apprenticeships, and then really dig into how to get started. So without any further ado, let's kick it over to Rachel. Rachel?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, and I appreciate that you all have joined us today. I'm just going to take a few minutes to go ahead and talk about apprenticeships, as Hal has already introduced. I want to talk a little bit about my company's functionality and what we do and how we can help with apprenticeships. Currently, right now, we are contracted by the Department of Labor. We're an industry intermediary for the transportation industry. And what we do is we actually help employers, we help associations, we help individual groups set up apprenticeships. And we're seeking right now to work between the DOL and employers and associations to actually facilitate and make this process more expedient. We have a commercial co-venture with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Hiring Our Heroes program. If you're not familiar with them, they do quite a bit of work to help veterans obtain jobs. They're very present at a lot of on-post, on-base, different job fairs, everything like that. They host them, and they do a lot of work towards helping veterans with employment. We have a joint venture with them to assist in employing veterans. But we don't just focus on veteran hiring. Our company has always been very veteran oriented. But what we focus on is getting jobs for all different types of people. So women, you're going to look at minorities, veterans, youth, and underemployed. We focus on different venues to help everyone obtain jobs through apprenticeships. As far as our functionality goes, these are some of the different departments, the different groups that we work with. And you'll see the U.S. Chambers on here, the USO. We have different products that we help with hiring. So the Hiring Our Heroes, we have a resume engine, works directly with the USO. We have Career Spark, Fast Track. These help a lot with veterans and obtaining jobs, but they also help to build resumes for anyone seeking apprenticeships. We work with the George Bush Foundation, and you'll see the ESGR, National Guard. There's a lot of technology on one side of the house, and we do different technological advancements, and we also, of course, then on my side, help with apprenticeships. And then we actually have different employer partners. We have Tempest, Saya, Venture. We have different partners that we've partnered with apprenticeships. These particular partners have gone above and beyond to help the underemployed, the veterans, minorities, and everyone through the apprenticeship process. These particular employers have come to FASTPORT, they've worked with us, and then we've worked in turn through the DOL to get them approved for their own individual apprenticeship. Later on down the road in the presentation, we'll actually go through what it takes for an apprenticeship and how to get one started. But so far, these are our particular apprentices. We have different co-sponsored national standards, and that is what these employers actually typically fall under. Most of them will fall under one of our co-sponsor standards. Now, some of them do have their own standards that we have helped them put through the DOL. Either route, we can help any employer advance their apprenticeship. There's 4 national standards that we have, the 3 we have right now, and the 1 that are pending. The National Association for Publicly Funded Truck Driver Schools, Ammonia Refrigeration, RETA, IAR, and then, of course, the CVTA. That's on the right. On the left, we have the different jobs that we have also built apprenticeships for, not just the associations. So these are particular jobs that we've had apprenticeships built around. So, of course, they're high-need occupations. They're going to be, like mechanics and truck drivers, a lot of these occupations that a lot of our employers are really seeking to hire because these industries are going in a different direction as far as diesel mechanics, automobile. We are here to help people fill these positions for our employers, but we're also here to boost and bolster these industries and to bring in employees and to give them training and to provide them with an opportunity and in turn to fill the void that many of our employers are seeing. We're going to get into what a registered apprenticeship is. The RTI providers and the employers and the federal, state, and the other partners, this is who works together to make an apprenticeship. Now, an RTI provider is actually what most of us refer to as a school or training organization. So, for example, it's going to be a CDL school that provides the training for CDL drivers. Registered Training and Instruction Providers is what that stands for. And then, of course, we have our employers, our union. We have our industry associations. And then on this side, you have your federal, state, your registration agencies, which is your DOL. And then, of course, any other partners. You might have some government employees that work in your workforce office, any other particular partners to help apprenticeships be built. All four of these groups work together, and what we do as an apprenticeship sponsor, you'll see us in the white circle in the center, we actually work to bring all of the partners together. And we work to bring everyone in expedient, to get this done quickly, but to also be there to provide support, because building an apprenticeship can seem like a daunting task. But what we're here to do is to make it easier on our employers and to be able to get them where they can hire apprentices and they can offer these opportunities, and to be able to get them registered with the federal agencies like the Department of Labor and DOL. The next slide is going to be the core components. It's going to kind of give an overview of what is actually needed in a registered apprenticeship and what a registered apprenticeship will offer. So most apprenticeships are at least a year, which is 2,000 hours. The way that they base that is approximately 40 hours a week, 52 weeks. They can go all the way up to 8 years depending on that particular job and the type of training. They're structured, they're supervised. What that means is that the national standards that are built or that can be built for a particular employer, they offer structure. They have different appendices, which I'll go through a little bit later, but one of them is a work process. It's an Appendix A. That appendix gives a general outline of the job, and it gives a general outline of the training that would be provided. And it's just basically a training outline. So that's a lot of the structure. It's the actual Appendix A, and then the actual training, of course, itself that is provided to the apprentice. It's supervised, meaning that somebody is providing the training. The employer, anyone that the employer has working as a trainer along those lines. Then, of course, you have to have employers to have an apprenticeship. The employer is the one doing the hiring. They're providing what is called OJT. It is on-the-job training. Really what that means is they're taking an apprentice and they're either providing them with the schooling and the training needed, and then they're furthering that through the on-the-job training, which is, for example, let's go back to a CDL driver. They go to driving school. Some providers do actually have their own driving school. Some employers hire outside of driving school. So then they'll provide the OJT, which is actually where a driver finishes driving school, they get their CDL, and then they go and they sit with a trainer and they learn to actually drive the truck and they learn to function on the roads. That's going to be what the OJT is. They do recommend, the DOL recommends 144 hours per year. When it's parallel front-loaded segmented options, basically what that means is the training is divided up. For example, again, you have your driving school, you have X amount of months that they're riding with their trainer. Then you might have X amount of time that they are learning different aspects of driving, maybe doing it on their own. They're still supervised, of course, by their driver manager. And then, of course, safety training, everything along those lines. Those are your segmented, different options. And then front-loaded means that they typically get a lot of their training in their school, which is at the very front of the process before they start their job. For ammonia refrigeration techs, they're getting their training and their schooling up front. They're going in there doing their training after the fact. And then, of course, rewards and skills. What does an apprenticeship really offer? It brings in earnings for an employee. It gives them skills. It gives them opportunity. And it gives them a place where they feel like that they've been given something, so they're willing to give back in return. They've been offered the training. They've been offered the schooling. So they're willing to give that back in return and stay with their employer. So, of course, it's a big retention tool for employers. And then they do offer, because it is an apprenticeship, the DOL offers a national credential. At the end of each apprenticeship, when it's completed, the DOL actually offers a certificate to that particular apprentice, and that apprentice can put it on their resume. They can, of course, keep up with it and use it to further their career and their employment. So they do have a nationally recognized credential. And so why registered apprenticeships? This segues strictly and directly into where are the benefits. So they're very proven or skills, retainable, sustainable workforce. They do give retention. They train at the highest level. Really what this means for an employer, it's an ROI. And we will go into the ROI a little further. We'll actually directly go to the ROI for the employer, and then we'll go into the benefits for the employee as well, and later on in a couple slides. But employers are interested not only in providing opportunity, but they're also interested in return on investment. We all know that ROI is one of the biggest things when you're hiring. And one of the biggest players in ROI is retention. Apprentices are very, very, I wouldn't say easy to retain, but they're very motivated to be retained. If an employer is willing to offer them the training, if the employer offers them the support and continues to maintain that support, apprentices are much more likely to stay. Apprenticeships also are a great recruiting tool. They allow employers to have a competitive advantage. What that actually means is you can go in and market your apprenticeship to employees. You can say, we have a registered apprenticeship, we provide you the training, we provide you the opportunity. And you actually, for veterans, they can draw what's called a monthly housing allowance. It's called MHA. For any veterans on the line, you might have known it as BAH. It's not quite the same thing, but it's essentially a version of BAH, which is basic allowance housing for active duty. With MHA, veterans can come into an apprenticeship, and if they have post 9/11 GI Bill, they can file for a certificate of eligibility with the VA, the Veterans Administration, and they can actually draw a monthly stipend that is tax-free based on being under an apprenticeship. So it's a wonderful retention tool for employers on one aspect, but it's also so much opportunity for veterans. And then for apprentices who are non-veterans, of course, they receive the training, they receive the certificate, the support. So as far as registered apprenticeships, we start talking ROI. We start talking upon how much is being invested by the federal government in these apprenticeships, where companies can not only get retention, they can not only get recruitment opportunities, but they can also get perhaps a monetary return on investment. In 2016 and 2017, $175 million was invested across the country in different apprenticeship grants. 2018, you're looking at about $145 million that has been approved by the government thus far. They haven't quite come out and said exactly when it'll be released, but it will be released sometime in the near future. And in 2016, you can see where the actual grants went. If you look at the slide, they went to accelerator grants, which actually went to the state level. They went to expansion grants to grow apprenticeships, and that was $50.5 million. And then they went into initiative grants. These different types of grants are when they're going to be released, they're going to actually work towards not only expanding, but also growing apprenticeships, and maybe perhaps even offering it in other facets that it hasn't been offered in. There are a lot of high need positions that need to be filled, and there's been a lot of directives, especially towards the trucking industry and mechanics, but there will be some focus on IT and some of the other facets that are quick growing jobs that are becoming very popular, especially with millennials. There are some marketing opportunities for employers, and they can be listed on the Department of Labor. OA stands for Office of Apprenticeship. They can be listed on the OA website. They will actually be considered registered with the Department of Labor. They'll be approved by the Department of Labor. They can attend job fairs, Hiring Our Heroes events, which are on post to hire veterans, working with the U.S. Chamber. They can attend different job fairs. There are all kinds of platforms that are offered to apprenticeship providers. And then, of course, they can receive technical assistance. Not only can the OA staff provide it, but Department of Labor industry intermediaries such as FASTPORT can offer different assistance with apprenticeships. They can offer help with building the apprenticeship, support needed to understand how the apprenticeship process works. They can help with monthly housing allowance and the paperwork that's required by the VA. They can advise on how to fill out the paperwork that's required by the DOL. It's one form called the DOL ETA 671. And you can be provided with considerable support in building and maintaining an apprenticeship by the OA office, by intermediaries. This is not something that when an employer goes out and obtains an apprenticeship, it's not something that they will be left by the wayside with no assistance. There's a massive push by the current administration to be able to provide help with these apprenticeships, to grow them, so employers will have that assistance. This gives a general idea of how industry intermediaries approach building an apprenticeship and what exactly we do. I've covered most of it, that we serve as a liaison between the DOL and employers and associations. We do provide the technical assistance. We're here to expand apprenticeships. So what that actually means for an employer, and when an intermediary expands an apprenticeship, we're here to do it at no cost to the employer. And I know we discussed ROI, and I know that a big part of ROI is how much is this going to cost to begin an apprenticeship. For FASTPORT to help an employer build the Appendix A, B, C, and D for them to get their training in order and there's no change to the business model. Your training is what your training is. You actually just put it into a document. We help you with the formatting. We help you with the submission to the DOL. There's no cost to the employer to have a registered apprenticeship. There's absolutely, and I will repeat it, there is no cost for any of that assistance. FASTPORT is on a contract. We are paid by the DOL as an industry intermediary. So we are motivated to assist employers to build apprenticeships. That is our ROI. The more apprenticeships we help build, the more we're helping employers, employees, and we're fulfilling what the DOL has asked us to do. Currently, we have 4,700, a little over 4,700 total apprentices since January of 2017. The divisions, mainly it's going to be diversity apprentices, 45%, and you have your veteran apprentices, 35% of those 4,700, and then the other, which would be youth, women, etc., that's going to be your 20%. But 4,700 since January of 2017. I'll be honest, we're pretty proud of it. I mentioned some of these prior to, but these are our current approved national standards. We have one for truck drivers through NAPFTDS, the National Association for Publicly Funded Truck Driving Schools. And they have about 117 member community colleges in about 37 different states. And they also have employer partners that we work with to help these employers establish their apprenticeships. We also have another national partnership with GCCA, RETA, or IAR, Global Cold Chain Alliance, Refrigeration Engineers and Technicians Association, Ammonia Refrigeration Foundation, and the International Institute of Ammonia Refrigeration. This is actually a national standard for an ammonia refrigeration tech, and we've had this partnership recently. It's been approved and actually up and running in the last several months. And then we also have CVTA, which is a Commercial Vehicle Training Association, and they have a national standard for truck drivers as well. They have 200 training providers within 42 different states. So these are just some of the associations that we've worked with. And then, of course, you've seen the different employers on a previous slide that we've helped to build their apprenticeships or to expand the apprenticeships that they already have. This is just kind of a sample of what a leader is. And then there will be a slide right after this, just giving you some of the main companies that are some of the leaders that the DOL has appointed. These leaders are actually considered to be excellent in the field of apprenticeships. There's 230 apprenticeship leaders. They report higher productivity. They report higher retention. Their businesses continue to grow and expand because of apprenticeships. And because of the work that they've done, the DOL has actually given them the title as an apprenticeship leader. You'll see the sampling. You'll recognize a lot of these names, of course, Amazon, Microsoft, JB Hunt, USPS. There's 230 to be exact who have been leaders. It's just an opportunity for employers to not only recognize that apprenticeships, when they see other employers that are excelling, that are being called a leader by the Department of Labor, this is something that employers that don't have apprenticeships or employers that are looking to grow their apprenticeships need to take note of. These are Fortune 500 companies that are excelling because of their apprenticeship models, because of what they're doing and the opportunities that they're offering for their employees. They're getting their return on investment. These are the current apprenticeable occupations that are in really high need. We've kind of covered them on another slide as well, but I like to go back over them. CDL drivers, everybody needs CDL drivers. Diesel techs, mechanics. There's opportunities for others, chassis mechanics, anything that's in the mechanic field, the technician field. There's opportunities to go ahead and take those and expand a national standard on that. Plus, you're looking at your transportation management, so your driver managers, your fleet managers, anything that's transportation-based as well. Logistics engineers, IT. IT actually works in the transportation industry, as we all know. Freight brokers, hydraulics, aviation, and then refrigerant technicians are our latest branch out into the ammonia gas world. Now, as I mentioned before, in building an apprenticeship, there is no change to the business model. The company needs to look at their current training model and to identify their current trainers and their current mentors, and then do an Appendix A to get that work process just in a written format. It doesn't have to be formalized. That's something FASTPORT can help with later. And then to be able to select apprentices. Do you want to have a push for veteran hiring? Do you want to have a push to hire women? Do you want to have a push to hire minorities? Where is your push? Do you want to hire youth? Do you want to offer opportunities to younger folks? Select your apprentice market, and it can be all of the above. It doesn't have to be an either or. That's the thing with apprenticeships. We were recently, just to give a backstory on the fact that it's never an either or with an apprenticeship. We were recently approached and asked by an employer if that employer should have an apprenticeship or if it should start its own school. And my response was, you need to do both. You don't need to change your business model to build an apprenticeship, but if you want to expand it and then start an apprenticeship or expand your model and expand your apprenticeship, do both. They're not mutually exclusive. You can do an apprenticeship and still maintain or grow your current business model. Of course, you provide on-the-job training, and you can provide the schooling, or you can take an apprenticeship candidate out of school. So those are really the three things you have to do to be able to start an apprenticeship or to expand the current one that you have. Now we'll get into the apprentices, the benefits for employers, for apprentices. The biggest thing that apprentices are getting, hands-on career training. They're getting practical experience. They're receiving on-the-job training. It doesn't necessarily require them to go to college, to go to CDL school. It doesn't require them to spend a considerable amount of money to obtain an education in certain fields. It allows them the training and the support that they need without putting themselves in debt. It allows them the education where they get hands-on skills, competencies, and you can earn college credit through apprenticeships. It just depends on what the employer is offering as part of their training model. And there are funding opportunities for employees who are trying to get into an apprenticeship. There's what they call work opportunity tax credits. This funding is offered to those who might need particular assistance in getting CDL school, in getting an education, any type of training. There are funds that are allotted at the state level, and they're usually obtainable by employees from the workforce office. They do get the national credential, as I mentioned earlier, where they get the certificate from the DOL they can put on their resume. And then the biggest thing is they're offered an opportunity for a career. They're not just being offered a job. They're being given competitive salaries. They actually earn more typically than those who do not go through apprentices for the same position. And they're being offered the opportunity to stay with an employer who values them. These are just some of the apprenticeship program participation payout, essentially what some of these employees can be offered. If you'd like to take a look at some of these opportunities for post 9/11 and Chapter 33 GI Bill, active duty, what they can earn to be eligible to go and get their education through an apprenticeship program, just refer back to these two slides, 25 and 26. Now, the benefits to the employers, to the customized training, the increased knowledge, but the biggest two things, you're getting employee retention, you're getting an opportunity to market an apprenticeship, and 91% of apprentices that complete an apprenticeship, they're still employed 9 months later. That's one of the Department of Labor's biggest statistics. When it comes to apprenticeships, you're offered that recruiting tool of a stable pipeline. You can go out and use your apprenticeship to recruit. You can use it to retain, but you're getting a pipeline and you're being able to build a pipeline. For example, I used to work for a company that their focus was veteran hire. They would build a pipeline of veterans who were transitioning from active duty out into the workforce. And that was their pipeline that they used for their apprenticeship. There are so many opportunities to be able to build a pipeline through the model of apprenticeship, not just veterans. These are going to give you some tax credit slides. They are going to give you tax credits and then, of course, tuition support that can be offered to employers who are assisting their employees with maybe going to CDL school or obtaining a licensure of some sort. Tax credits, and this is where we're going to talk about WOTC, work opportunity tax credits. These are offered to different employers based on their hiring and how they've hired. You get tax credits for hiring veterans, you get tax credits for hiring minorities and women, but there are also apprenticeship tax credits that are out there. For example, the state of Montana just recently released in March a $5,000 tax credit for each apprentice hired. Currently, there are 2 bills in the House and there are 2 bills in the Senate. They're very similar in that once they're actually approved, that they would come out and it would be a $5,000 tax credit for every apprentice hired. They have not been approved. The ones in the House are probably the most likely to come out. It's been sitting in the House since about 2017 in July, but there has recently been a big push to produce this tax credit. So there are different opportunities for apprenticeship hiring directly. If you gear your apprenticeship towards a certain demographic, there are also work opportunity tax credits that are offered to that particular demographic. For apprentices and employers, I've created a slide that just gives a general idea of some of the money and the actual ROI. It's for apprentices, it's $60,000, what the average salary is upon program completion. So $60,000 is what an apprentice averages as a salary once they've completed an apprenticeship program. An apprenticeship will increase a worker's compensation by about $300,000 over their lifetime. For employers realize an average investment about $1.47 for every dollar invested. And for every dollar invested, there's actually a public return of $28 in benefits. These particular numbers come directly from the Department of Labor and the latest study that they've produced. And then, of course, employers have the access to the local and state resources and the intermediary resources. Employers want to pursue those local and state resources as well to be able to utilize any of the funds that come to the state level. Some of the funding that we discussed earlier that will be released, that will come to the state level. All right, let's get started. So what does it really take to start an apprenticeship from points A to points B? I've compiled just a list of really short, really easy questions that typically are the first and foremost questions on an employer's mind when they're hiring apprentices or starting an apprenticeship or expanding their apprenticeship. Once again, the Appendix A, it's a work process. It's what your current business model is doing. So if you're an employer that provides schooling for someone who's coming in, and then once they've completed your school, then you hire them to be a truck driver, then that's going to be your Appendix A model. If you hire them after they go to school and they go to a provider that you might partner with, but you might not necessarily provide the schooling itself, then that's your business model. If your training is 3 months with a trainer, if your training is 6 months with a trainer, that's your business model. Now, some employers will ask, well, we all know that, for example, a truck driver is not trained typically for a year. They don't ride with their trainer or anything for too much longer than 3 to 6 months. They're still being supervised by their driver manager. They're still completing safety training. They're still furthering their driving career by getting mileage. So that's why apprenticeships are typically set at a year or more. But they can actually be a full-blown truck driver, full-fledged truck driver, which the DOL will call a journey worker. They can be driving on their own, but they can still be in an apprenticeship, and they can still be getting the benefits of apprenticeship. And that works to the employer's advantage for retention, but it also works to the employee's advantage for the training, the continued support, their certificate, and of course, if they're a veteran, the monthly housing allowance. For FASTPORT, if you would like to join one of our current national standards, we also have a national standard that is just for truck driver, and it's not necessarily a partnership with an APFTDS or CDTA. You don't have to be an employer partner with one of those associations. We do have national standards for truck driver, mechanic, several of the ones you saw on one of the slides earlier. If you're interested in getting started and are interested in doing it in a quick manner, what you would want to do is sign what's called an Appendix E, which is an employer acceptance agreement, and provide FASTPORT with your Appendix A work process. What the employer acceptance agreement does is it allows FASTPORT to submit for the company or the employer's apprenticeship, and it cuts down the time. So typically, anywhere between 4 and 8 weeks for FASTPORT to submit the apprenticeship and the DOL to approve it, where then the employer has an up and running apprenticeship. It's much quicker than an employer having to write their own apprenticeship, appendices A, B, C, D, and E, and then to submit to the DOL and then wait for them to approve it, which can take several months. Now, another question that typically gets asked at this point is, well, what if something happens to FASTPORT, or will we have our standalone apprenticeship? The answer is yes. When you sign an Appendix C, you submit your Appendix A, or if you do your own standard, you get a RAPIDS code. This RAPIDS code is given to the employer by the DOL. This identifies that employer as having their own standalone apprenticeship. This particular RAPIDS code is how the employer would track any of their apprentices. So anything were to ever happen to FASTPORT or any intermediary that an employer pursued a partnership with, that employer would still have its own standalone apprenticeship no matter what. That's why intermediaries were created, was to make this process more expedient. But it is essentially the same process. It's just sped up a little bit. We've hit on, will it change an employer's business model? The answer is no. You submit your business model, your Appendix A, and that is what is set. And the only thing that FASTPORT would do would be to help you put it into a format that would go to the DOL. Will an employer have its own apprenticeship? Covered that. What position standards are available immediately? Please refer back to slides. And then what is the cost? Once again, this doesn't cost the employer anything. The only thing the employer would have to do once their apprenticeship is up and running, there is one form for the Department of Labor called the DOL ETA 671. The top half of the form would contain any apprentice's information, name, address, etc. The bottom portion is actually pre-filled out, essentially, based on the employer's pay scale that they have for their training model. And this particular form would just be filled out for each apprentice. And then each apprentice is entered into a database called RAPIDS, which is where the RAPIDS code comes from. Now, if you'd like to partner with an intermediary such as FASTPORT, FASTPORT will actually essentially help you with the ETA 671 and will help with the input of apprentices into the RAPIDS database and will assist the employer in doing so. And then once the employer is comfortable and able to maintain those documents, then at that point, FASTPORT can segue off of the assistance. But that is a partnership between FASTPORT and the employer, and FASTPORT will help as long as needed. The only other type of paperwork would be the monthly housing allowance for veteran hiring, and that's called MHA again. That is going to be VA paperwork. FASTPORT can get an employer on the track, can provide them the forms that they would need, and can tell them how to set up the benefit paperwork with the VA. FASTPORT can give advice on that as well. So that's basically the overview of cost, ROI, benefits to employers, employees, and what FASTPORT does. So I'd love to open up the floor to any questions.
That was great, Rachel. Thank you so much. A lot of great information there, really info-packed. The first one is somebody has a question about work process. You mentioned defining a work process. Could you talk a little bit about what's entailed in that exercise?
Yeah. So a work process is going to be what a particular company has for their current training model. So typically the way that it reads is it gives a basic overview of this national standard is either a partnership between FASTPORT and Company A, or it'll say this national standard belongs to Company A. From there, that's the opening page of an Appendix A. Underneath that, it's going to actually give you kind of a breakdown of typical training. So for example, let's go back to CDL driver because that's what we all know. With a CDL driver, they're going to get usually an average is 160 hours for a school. So it would state that the driver is going to either prior go to school for 160 hours or that the employer actually provides the schooling of 160 hours. And it also it doesn't have to be completely detailed, but it can give a breakdown of that 160 hours. They work on backing. They work on shifting. It can give a breakdown. And then it would go from there and would kind of segue into whatever their training model is. So for example, if an employer brought someone in straight out of school and maybe they give them a week of orientation because they need to hire them. So it would just detail that there's a week of orientation, and that orientation, they'll be drug testing, they'll be completing some safety classes, anything along those lines. And then from there, it could go down and say, okay, now that we've completed this week of orientation hiring, we're actually going to go ahead and break it down of what this driver is going to do. So they spend 3 months training with a trainer. And while they're training, once again, they're going to be working on their backing. They're going to be working on any type of on-road driving skills. They're going to be meeting their fleet manager and getting some requisite training as a new hiree with their fleet manager. They're going to be doing some extra safety maneuvers. Anything that that particular carrier does is going to be their breakdown of their training model. And it can be very basic. It doesn't have to be, well, today they did this and tomorrow they're going to do that. As long as it encompasses what that employer does and it hits typical requisite things that a driver would actually work toward, like getting a CDL, being accident-free, driving, backing, anything that driver, that's a very typical CDL driver opportunity. That's what's going to be in Appendix A. So the employer would just kind of detail their process, and it can be a page, it can be half a page, and then what FASTPORT would do is we would help them get it in a format where it reads clearly, and it's just step by step. And typically it'll break down the hours. And what I can do too is I can provide you with a sample Appendix A if you'd like to share it with any of your members that have questions, or they can contact me and I can share some with them. So we have different samples of Appendix A. It'll give an hours breakdown, and the hours, depending on if they want a year or 2-year apprenticeship, it would just give 2,000 hours up to 4,000 being a year. And FASTPORT can help break down that hour, 160 hours for school. And maybe that first 3 months, they're going to be spending an average of 160 hours a month for the first 3 months doing training. And then after that, that's exactly how an Appendix A would work. And it's not a set process so much as it's up to the employer to tell us or for them to decide how they want it to be received and how they want this to look. And we just give them suggestions.
So Rachel, if a company's got a training program already in place for their employees, and we'll continue on with the driver. So they've got a training program in place. It sounds like you can work with them to translate their training program into a work process. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is exactly what we do, Hal.
We've got a related question. Is there an education requirement component to this process?
Education requirement for the employee?
Yeah.
If we're going to stick to driver, every driver has to go get their CDL. So that would be an education component that would be required for a driver. But I think depending on what that training model is and what the licensure requirements would be, that would be your education requirement. So for ammonia refrigeration, they have to receive certain licensure opportunities to be able to be a technician. They have to receive certain training. And of course, RETA requires them to meet certain standards to be an ammonia tech. Those would be your education requirements. It wouldn't be that an employer has to create education requirements. It would be what an industry standard educational requirement is for that particular job.
How long does it usually take for somebody to kind of go from, I really want to do this, to I've got all my paperwork filled out, I've worked with FASTPORT, and when would I be able to start recruiting for apprentices?
When you actually start up an apprenticeship, of course, it depends on how long your internal process takes for your internal folks to say yay or nay. But once you've gotten past that step, typically if you reach out to FASTPORT and you can get us a training model in Appendix A, we can usually in a week have that lined out, as long as the employer is available to have discussions on the phone, have that lined out in a format that would be submitted to the DOL. And from there, I would say DOL usually takes about anywhere between 4 and 8 weeks for approval. It doesn't usually take 8 weeks, but sometimes from submission, if their fiscal year ends in October, sometimes it could be a busy time. That's a typical window. Once an employer has received Department of Labor approval for their apprenticeship, they can actually start using it as a recruiting tool that day. They can start putting it out there. And then what I would always recommend is if they're going to partner with FASTPORT, that they would reach out and ask how to fill out the forms or to complete any paperwork. But our administrator, Gina Molinak, is phenomenal with the Department of Labor ETA 671. She handles all of it for our employer partners, and she handles all of the rapids. She's actually on the call today, and she would be the one who would send the employer that information as far as the ETA 671 and get them up and running with the rapids database and help them with all of the paperwork on that. So it would be a pretty quick and instantaneous process. She's very efficient. As far as the VA paperwork, once the Department of Labor has approved the apprenticeship for the employer, they can start at that point to file for a facility code. I won't get off in the weeds too much on the VA paperwork, but they would file for a facility code with the VA state representative. And from there, they would wait for approval from the VA for that facility code. Once they have that facility code, they would be able to start submitting the VA paperwork for their veteran apprentices. And for any veteran apprentice, it can take a little while with the VA. The VA can take a little bit sometimes for approval, but the VA will back pay any apprentice to their hiring date or to the Department of Labor approval date, whichever one is the most recent date. So they will back pay a veteran. So if a veteran has to wait for approval for a little bit for their monthly housing allowance, the VA will actually back pay them.
Here's a good question. Are there tax advantages for the employer to set up a program like this?
Yes, as I mentioned, there are different tax credits and advantages, but their work opportunity tax credits, a lot of apprenticeships are focused towards veteran hiring, towards minorities, women, and different demographics. So of course there are work opportunity tax credits for those demographic hirings already. There are a couple states, Georgia's one, Montana's one. They do have apprenticeship credits at the state level. Montana's is $5,000. And then we're waiting for the House of Representatives or the Senate, whichever comes first, to approve a tax credit across the board for apprenticeships. I believe it's coming, personal opinion, but there are 2 bills in the House, 2 bills in the Senate that are waiting approval for an across the board tax credit for apprenticeship. And usually when they approve those, most tax credits end up being, not all, but most end up being retroactive. So if any of these tax credits, once they get approved, are made retroactive back to a certain date, of course, then at that point, any apprentices that were hired between that retroactive date and the current date of approval would be available for an employer to file tax credits on. But to answer the question, yes. And they can refer to a couple of the slides in here for further information.
Super. Here's a good question. Can I use non-traditional training not mentioned within the scope of the FASTPORT description as an apprenticeship?
I'm going to be honest, that one's a little vague, but I think it just depends on the employer's training. I would say yes. It's based on the employer's model. I think non-traditional training, it would depend on the scope. And for anyone who asked that question, if you'd like to give me a call, I can probably talk you through it a little bit better with a little more specifics. But I would say, just kind of off the cuff, I would say yes. It just depends on as long as they meet that requisite industry standard. So as long as that truck driver has a CDL, as long as that technician has that licensure. It just depends on what the industry standard is, because industry standard does have to be met. Non-traditional training, depending on the employer model, at that point would be something that you'd have to discuss individually.
Right. But it's possible. Okay. Here's an interesting question. Would each employer need to offer the apprenticeship program, or could IANA offer it as an association?
So IANA can actually partner. They have the option to partner with FASTPORT to offer as an association, just like CBTA, NAPFTDS. And IANA and FASTPORT right now are discussing different models. The employers right now have the option to go ahead and sign an Appendix E under any of the current national standards that are offered by FASTPORT. And then once IANA as an association offers a national standard, the employer could actually be a part of that association as well and sign an Appendix E for that. An Appendix E, if I haven't made that clear, it's the employer acceptance agreement. All that employer acceptance agreement says is that you will adhere to your standards that you've put forth in your work process that you've put forth in the Appendix A, that you'll adhere to the national standards. Example, again, CDLs have to be obtained for truck drivers, that you'll adhere to that national standard for the industry, and that you're willing to be part of the partnership. An employer can actually sign an Appendix E and be part of a partnership for more than one national standard. For example, we have several employers that have joined both, especially large truck driving employers that have joined both CBTA and NAPFTDS standards. They are members of both associations, and they wanted to be part of both national standards. It doesn't conflict. It doesn't change the apprenticeship. Signing one national standard will get an apprenticeship up and running. But an employer does have the opportunity to sign under FASTPORT. They do have the opportunity to build their own as well. And they also would have the opportunity, once IANA had its own national standard, should they choose to do so, to be able to sign up under IANA.
Great. Here's a good question that revolves around marketing, which is always, particularly with drivers, a very hot topic. Can you offer any advice, any wisdom from folks that you've worked with already about where to find folks that might be appropriate for apprenticeship programs and how to let them optimally know that you as an employer have an apprenticeship program that they might be right for?
So the biggest push right now for hiring are the veterans. There are ample opportunities to approach veterans once they're segueing out of the military, so they're transitioning. The Hiring Our Heroes events, they're offered on post, they're on base, and those particular events will bring in a multitude of veterans who are in the process of getting out or close to being in the process of getting out of the military. And it will offer the opportunity for the employer to be face-to-face, and it will offer the employer opportunity to be able to approach veterans for hiring, because there are a lot of opportunities with veterans and apprenticeships because they can draw their monthly housing allowance, which is a great retention tool. It's a great marketing tool for the veteran market if a company is interested in marketing strictly to veterans or marketing to veterans and other demographics. So that is a fantastic marketing tool. And with the MHA, it pays different for every zip code, but it can pay anywhere between, I think the lowest I've seen recently was around $900, depending on the zip code. I've seen all the way up to almost $3,000 a month, tax-free. So it's a fantastic recruiting tool. As far as marketing for apprenticeships in general, I always recommend that once an employer has established its apprenticeship, that it visit with any of its local workforce boards and discuss any opportunities for funding, any opportunities for marketing with those local workforce boards for apprenticeships, because the workforce boards will be the ones that will receive the funding, or the state level, I should say, will receive the funding, but the workforce boards will be involved in much of that. So any type of marketing you can do in conjunction. I would also say to reach out to an intermediary in general and discuss the opportunities for apprenticeship. Perhaps the intermediary can assist in any marketing opportunity. They can always point an employer in the right direction as well, individually. So probably those are going to be the best opportunities to start with.
Excellent advice. Someone's just asking for clarification. What was the name of the association that you mentioned with regards to veterans again?
Oh, Hiring Our Heroes, HOH.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's actually listed. You'll see the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation's Hiring Our Heroes program, and any of those veteran associations listed. The employers can do research on them. There are ample opportunities, too, for hiring veteran talent. ESGR, Employer Support of the Guard Reserve. There are ample opportunities to do some work with those veteran organizations to hire veterans.
Thank you. It's a great program. there are a lot of employers that are really keen on hiring veterans, but it sounds like if you can offer an apprenticeship program, you're really creating a differentiator for your organization to really show your dedication to those veterans and offer them a gateway to some pretty significant financial benefits.
I would absolutely agree with you, Hal. It's a good starting point. And then once you have an employer has a grasp on the apprenticeship perhaps and the inner workings of the apprenticeship, and then who exactly that employer is marketing to with their jobs they're trying to fill, and you can usually use that apprenticeship at that point to segue out into other demographics. But I will say veterans, for one, are very good about talking to other veterans. So if an employer treats a veteran correctly and appropriately and offers them that opportunity, usually one veteran will bring in a multitude. I'll give you a real quick story. I know we have to go shortly. I used to work for a Fortune 500 company in their military program. And one of my coworkers hired a veteran that he had actually served with. And this veteran was out in Colorado at that point and took a truck driving job in one of the accounts in Colorado. And that particular veteran brought on, I believe, 6 other veterans, and they have had almost zero turnover on that account. And it was a very high turnover account. They've had almost zero turnover in that account in the last 2 years. They have not hired a new driver in the last 2 years on that account, and he brought in 6 other veterans.
That's amazing. Rachel, thank you so much for sharing this really helpful information. Do you have any parting advice for folks?
I just want to say thank you very much, Hal, for having me on the webinar, and I appreciate IANA very much for allowing me to be on the webinar. Anyone who wants to know how to get started, who just wants some general information, my name and number are right here on screen, as you can see. I will be happy to have a phone conversation. We can set up a time for a phone conference. We can communicate by email. But my advice to any employer who's considering apprenticeship, do your research, ask around, talk to other employers that you might have friends that work there, talk to me as an industry intermediary, reach out, go get online on the DOL's website, check out some of the links in the handout, but know that it's not nearly as daunting of a task as it seems. It's sometimes easier to do things with help. That's why FASTPORT is here. But if you can offer opportunity for your employees and you can get that retention and marketing tool and you can essentially do it at no cost, why wouldn't you? Thanks, Hal.
Well, that's all we have time for today. I'd really like to thank our guest, Rachel Rowe, again for joining us and sharing this great information about the incredible opportunities that apprenticeships can provide the intermodal supply chain. If you'd like more information about apprenticeships, you can visit fastport.com or connect with Rachel directly at rachel.rowe@fastport.com. If you'd like more information about IANA, please visit intermodal.org. Thanks for joining us at IANA, the connecting force behind freight.